Emile Zola was a major figure in France in the late 1800s, which goes a long way to explaining why I've never heard of him. Around the turn of the century, though, with his very much of-the-time writings, which took France by storm, he arguably surpassed Victor Hugo in terms of fame in their day. Even in his twilight years, Zola was not one to settle down, taking on the French military system in regards to their false conviction of Alfred Dreyfus with one simple headline, J'accuse. This was a man who saw injustice and refused to be silent, a man who embodied the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword, a man who would not sit idly by while his fellow man was being unjustly dragged through the mud. And in 1937, he was the subject of the 10th winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture. But with a man of such varied achievements, can a 116-minute movie really capture his entire story? Let's find out. Here we are, 10 movies into the series with The Life of Emile Zola. The technical. This is getting more and more difficult to talk about. We're far enough into the sound era that having a scene properly mic'd isn't a big deal. And after the great Ziegfeld the year before, having a decently framed shot isn't worth mentioning. Yeah, the sound is consistent, and sure, the camera is steady, making everything easy to follow. But most of the movie takes place indoors, in controlled environments, which makes that a fairly simple task. There are standout achievements, sure, the sets are worth mentioning, with the exterior shots really feeling like a turn-of-the-century French town. But in the 1930s, that was about like finding a shot nowadays that could pass for the late 1980s. There's nothing offensive here, it feels fine, but there's no "a pretty girl is like a melody" sequence. Nothing that grabs and holds you like some of the sequences in Wings, or even the land rush scene in Cimarron. This isn't so much a point against the movie, but it's nothing to write home about either. The writing. This is not a biopic. This is a courtroom drama masquerading as a biopic. Zola's childhood is never even mentioned, hopping in when he is a starving artist as a young adult. A half hour later, he's in his late 50s, and Emile Zola himself only lived to be 62. The vast majority of his life as a growing, celebrated, controversial writer is rushed through at a breakneck pace, without any breathing room. When we get to the famous Dreyfus affair, the movie slows down to let us absorb what is happening. That isn't the end of the movie's writing problems, though, as it feels like it skims over the less interesting but vital points with an air of, they already know this crap. True, it was a fairly recent event at the time, taking place about 30 years prior, or about as long ago now in 2016 and 2017 as the Challenger explosion, or the Chernobyl disaster. So there were people in the audience who were around and aware when the events actually happened. But from a storytelling aspect, it's lazy. Imagine watching Argo without a thorough explanation of the cause of the Iranian hostage crisis.
Dying of cancer, the Shah was given asylum in the U.S. The Iranian people took to the streets outside the U.S. Embassy, demanding that the Shah be returned, tried, and hanged.
Or Spotlight, without an explanation as to the importance of the Catholic Church to the Bostonian community.
And so I could just walk into that courthouse right now and get those documents?
No, you cannot, because the documents are not there.
But you just said they're public.
I know I did, but this is Boston, and the church does not want them to be found. So, they are not there.
In The Life of Emile Zola, there's one blink-and-you'll-miss-it reference to the fact that Dreyfus is Jewish, a major factor in his accusation and speedy imprisonment, with numerous anti-Semitic riots breaking out surrounding the trial. There were exterior influences with that, with Hitler rising to power in Germany at the time of the movie's development, and while we were still a few years away from Kristallnacht and the ensuing horrors, Adolf's views on the Jewish people were becoming more obvious, and the movie executives had a worldwide box office to consider. So they ordered all mention of Dreyfus's heritage removed from the movie, lest it be implied that the movie was sympathetic towards the Jews. From a financial standpoint, I understand it, but it does feel like there's something missing from the equation. When the movie hits the trial and it takes the time to let us know what we need to know, it can be very engaging, but those moments aren't nearly as frequent as they need to be. The acting. This movie is mainly a vehicle for Paul Muni, who was a huge name at the time, rivaling Clark Gable at both of their heights. Muni was known for diving deep into character, researching thoroughly and hiding under layers of makeup that made him unrecognizable. He is very good in this. Mostly. In his early 40s at the time, Muni is a bit less convincing as the struggling young artist at the beginning of the movie. He tries to bring the youthful energy and wonder to it, but it rings a bit false. Not overwhelmingly so, but it does feel a bit more like a father trying to act young and almost pulling it off. As Zola ages, Muni seems to be more comfortable in the role, and really comes into his own. It's easy to see how he could have been a force to be reckoned with on the acting scene, bringing wisdom and weight to the role. Beyond him, I'm hard pressed to remember another character's name. Alright, there's his friend Paul Cezanne, yes, that Paul Cezanne, who appears early on. I can remember his name because I've taken an art class or two in my time. And yeah, there is Nana, who is in the whole 3 or 4 scenes. But I can only remember her name because it's the title of one of his books that is frequently repeated. Other people, such as Zola's wife, who is a great supporter of his throughout the movie, and Dreyfus, who is the real subject of most of the movie, don't leave much of an impression. Honestly, without cheating, I don't think I could tell you Dreyfus's first name. None of them leave an impact, and especially when placed up against the powerhouse that is Paul Muni, they all pale in comparison. Maybe I'm spoiled by the quality of biopics of today. Maybe the likes of Lincoln. Now! Or Ray.
How long you been on heroin, Ray?
Or The Aviator have really spoiled some of the trailblazers of the genre for me. But from today's standpoint, this one really does show some flaws. Paul Muni is really good, granted, but he's the lone tentpole in what could have used 3 or 4. It rushes, it skips, it stutters, and unfortunately ends up making too little of an impact to leave any kind of opinion in the long run. The movie was fine, yeah, I never caught myself checking to see how much time was left before the end of it. But it never seems to want to say anything more than there was a guy named Emile Zola who lived once. And for such a historical figure, focusing on one of the most important projects of his life, that's almost unforgivable. Ooh, Jimmy Stewart.